Hey there, folks. My name is Catherine, and I'm a 28-year-old living with my husband, Alexander, in our cozy New York apartment. Life's been quite a ride since high school. I dove straight into the workforce, earning certifications left and right, impressing my bosses enough to snag a promotion to a leadership role at the ripe age of 23. Yeah, I know. Pretty impressive, right? Anyway, let's fast forward a bit to the day Alexander dropped a bombshell on me. It was a regular evening, and I was just chilling at home, minding my own business, when Alexander came bounding in with a New York travel guidebook in hand. "What's that for?" I asked, curious as ever. And would you believe it? Alexander's eyes lit up like fireworks on the 4th of July. "Hey, Catherine, how about going on a trip to New York together? You've been there before, right?" he exclaimed, practically bursting with excitement. "Yeah, I've been there like 3 times, I replied, trying to keep up with his enthusiasm. Turns out, Alexander's family wanted to tag along too. "So, your mom is coming too?" I asked, trying to wrap my head around the sudden change in plans. "Yay, since we're already planning to go as a family. Family trip." Alexander cheered, looking like he'd just won the lottery. And there I was, caught off guard by the proposal. I mean, sure, I love traveling, but New York? With the in-laws? That's a whole different ballgame. But hey, Alexander seemed genuinely excited about it, and if it meant bonding with his family, maybe it was worth a shot. So, I plastered on a smile and agreed to join the trip. Little did I know, this decision would lead to a series of unexpected events that would change everything. But more on that later. So, there we were, gearing up for this impromptu trip to New York. Alexander was practically bouncing off the walls with excitement, and I couldn't help but get swept up in his enthusiasm. But as the days passed and the departure date drew nearer, I couldn't shake this nagging feeling of unease. See, Alexander's family had this habit of showing up unannounced and overstaying their welcome. And with this trip, I couldn't help but worry that it would be more of the same. Plus, there was the issue of finances. Alexander's salary wasn't exactly enough to cover the cost of a trip to New York, especially with his family tagging along. And then, just when I thought things couldn't get any more complicated, Alexander dropped another bombshell on me. "Hey, Catherine, it's about the rent. Could you cover mine for a while?" he asked one evening, his voice tinged with uncertainty. I was taken aback. I mean, we had only been married for a few months, and already Alexander was asking me to shoulder his financial burdens? It didn't sit right with me, but I couldn't bring myself to refuse him. After all, we were supposed to be a team, right? But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right. Alexander had always been the type to put on a brave face, but now it seemed like he was struggling more than he let on. And if he was struggling, what did that mean for us? As the days went by, the tension between us grew. Alexander seemed more distant, more preoccupied with his own thoughts. And try as I might, I couldn't shake the feeling that he was keeping something from me. Little did I know, our financial woes were just the beginning of a much bigger storm that was brewing on the horizon. But at the time, all I could do was hold on tight and hope for the best. As the days passed, the tension in our apartment seemed to thicken like soup left on the stove for too long. Alexander was increasingly distant, buried in his work or glued to his phone, and I couldn't help but feel like I was being shut out. But it wasn't just Alexander's behavior that was bothering me. No, it was the constant stream of visitors that seemed to flock to our doorstep like seagulls to a fishing boat. Alexander's family, consisting of his father, mother, and sister, Julia, had a knack for showing up uninvited and overstaying their welcome. And with each visit, I found myself growing more and more frustrated. It wasn't that I didn't like Alexander's family. They were perfectly pleasant people, for the most part. But there was something about the way they seemed to take over our home, rearranging furniture and leaving dirty dishes in their wake, that rubbed me the wrong way. And then there was Sophia, Alexander's mother. She had this way of making snide remarks that cut right to the bone, like a surgeon with a dull scalpel. "Just because you're at work doesn't mean you can neglect your chores, dear," she would say with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. I tried my best to brush off her comments, to let them roll off me like water off a duck's back. But deep down, they stung. They made me feel inadequate, like I was failing as a wife and a homemaker. And yet, despite my best efforts, Alexander seemed oblivious to my struggles. He would smile and nod along with his family's antics, as if everything was just peachy keen. It was like he was living in a different world, one where dirty dishes and snide remarks were just par for the course. But for me, it was becoming harder and harder to ignore the cracks in our relationship, the fissures that threatened to tear us apart. And as the departure date for our trip to New York loomed ever closer, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to give. As the departure date for our New York trip drew near, Alexander's excitement reached fever pitch. He couldn't stop talking about all the sights we were going to see, all the food we were going to eat, all the memories we were going to make. And for a brief moment, I let myself get caught up in his enthusiasm. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling of dread that had settled in the pit of my stomach. Going on a trip with Alexander's family was daunting enough, but going to New York? That was a whole other level of stress. I tried to voice my concerns to Alexander, to tell him that maybe it wasn't such a good idea for us all to go on this trip together. But he just brushed off my worries with a smile and a wave of his hand. "Don't worry, Catherine. It's going to be fine," he would say, as if that solved everything. And so, I found myself nodding along with his plans, plastering on a smile and pretending like everything was hunky-dory. But deep down, I knew that this trip was going to be anything but smooth sailing. But despite my reservations, I couldn't bring myself to back out. Alexander seemed genuinely excited about the trip, and if it meant bonding with his family, maybe it was worth a shot. Plus, I had already put in so much effort into planning the trip, booking flights and accommodations, researching things to do and see. It felt like it would be a waste to just throw it all away. And so, with a heavy heart and a sense of foreboding, I resigned myself to the fact that we were going to New York. Little did I know, this decision would lead to a series of events that would change everything. But more on that later. As the day of our departure to New York loomed closer, doubts began to gnaw at me like hungry mice nibbling on cheese. Was I really making the right decision by going on this trip? Should I have stood my ground and insisted on a trip just for Alexander and me? But every time these doubts crept into my mind, I pushed them away, reminding myself that this trip was supposed to be about family bonding. Alexander seemed genuinely excited about it, and if it meant strengthening our relationship with his family, maybe it was worth it. Still, as I packed my bags and double-checked our travel arrangements, a nagging sense of unease lingered in the back of my mind. What if things didn't go as planned? What if tensions between me and Alexander's family boiled over, ruining what was supposed to be a fun and relaxing vacation? But there was no turning back now. The tickets were booked, the bags were packed, and the car was waiting to take us to the airport. With a heavy heart and a sense of trepidation, I took a deep breath and stepped out the door, ready to face whatever lay ahead in the bustling streets of New York City. The morning of our departure arrived with a flurry of activity and nervous energy. Alexander's family gathered at our apartment, their excitement palpable as they chattered away about all the sights they were going to see in New York. But amidst the hustle and bustle, I couldn't shake the feeling of dread that weighed heavy on my shoulders. As I watched Alexander's family load their luggage into the car, I couldn't help but wonder if I was making a mistake by going on this trip. Still, I plastered on a smile and tried to push aside my doubts as we piled into the car and made our way to the airport. The drive was filled with nervous chatter and awkward silences as we all grappled with our own anxieties about the trip ahead. But as we pulled up to the airport and I saw the bustling crowds and heard the roar of the planes overhead, a sense of excitement began to bubble up inside me. Maybe this trip wouldn't be so bad after all. Maybe it would be a chance for me to bond with Alexander's family and make some lasting memories. With that thought in mind, I took a deep breath and stepped out of the car, ready to embark on our New York adventure. Little did I know, the drama was just beginning. As we navigated through the bustling crowds of the airport, excitement and anticipation hung thick in the air. Alexander's family chattered animatedly about the sights they were eager to see in New York, and I couldn't help but feel a twinge of excitement myself. But just as we reached the check-in counter and began to hand over our luggage, Sophia, Alexander's mother, dropped a bombshell that shattered the illusion of familial harmony. "Sally, what are you doing?" "You're not seriously coming, are you?" she blurted out, her words laced with thinly veiled disdain. I felt the blood drain from my face as I stared at her in disbelief. Was she serious? Had she just told me that I wasn't welcome on this trip? Before I could even process what was happening, Alexander's family continued on as if nothing had happened, leaving me standing there, feeling like a deer caught in the headlights. My heart sank as I realized that Alexander, too, seemed to be going along with Sophia's decision without so much as a word of protest. It was as if he had sided with his family over me, abandoning me in my moment of need. Anger and hurt surged through me like a tidal wave as I watched them disappear into the crowd, leaving me standing there, alone and rejected. In that moment, I knew that I couldn't go on pretending that everything was fine. Something had to change. And change it would, in ways that I never could have imagined. As I stood there, watching Alexander and his family disappear into the crowd, a whirlwind of emotions swept through me. Anger, hurt, betrayal, they all mingled together, creating a storm of resentment that threatened to consume me. How could Alexander do this to me? How could he stand by and allow his family to treat me like I was nothing more than an inconvenience? The realization hit me like a punch to the gut, and I felt a surge of regret wash over me. Regret for ever agreeing to go on this trip in the first place. Regret for not standing up for myself sooner. Regret for ever thinking that Alexander would have my back, no matter what. But amidst the regret, there was also a sense of clarity. I couldn't go on living like this, constantly bending over backwards to please Alexander and his family while sacrificing my own happiness in the process. It was time to take a stand, to reclaim my dignity and my self-respect. With a newfound sense of determination, I turned on my heel and marched back through the airport, my head held high and my heart set on a new path forward. Little did I know, this was just the beginning of a journey that would lead me down unexpected roads and into uncharted territory. But for now, all I could do was take it one step at a time and trust that the universe would guide me where I needed to go. As I made my way through the airport, a sense of liberation washed over me. I had finally taken a stand against the injustice and disrespect that had been heaped upon me, and it felt empowering. But as I navigated through the crowds, a nagging sense of uncertainty gnawed at the edges of my newfound resolve. Where would I go? What would I do? I had no plan, no destination in mind. All I knew was that I couldn't go back to the life I had been living, constantly overshadowed by Alexander and his family. With a heavy heart, I hailed a cab and gave the driver the address of my parents' house. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Maybe being back home would give me the clarity and perspective I needed to figure out my next move. As the cab pulled away from the airport, I couldn't help but replay the events of the past few hours in my mind. The rejection, the betrayal, the overwhelming sense of anger and hurt, it all seemed like a bad dream, a nightmare from which I couldn't wake up. But deep down, I knew that this was my reality now. I had confronted the truth head-on, and there was no going back. It was time to face the consequences of my actions and forge a new path forward, one that was free from the toxic influence of Alexander and his family. And so, with a mixture of trepidation and determination, I braced myself for the challenges that lay ahead. Little did I know, this was just the beginning of a journey that would lead me to discover strength and resilience I never knew I had. But for now, all I could do was take it one step at a time and trust that I was headed in the right direction. Arriving at my parents' house felt like stepping into a sanctuary after a long and arduous journey. The familiar sights and sounds wrapped around me like a warm blanket, soothing my frayed nerves and calming the storm of emotions that raged within me. As I stepped through the front door, I was enveloped in a sense of safety and comfort that I hadn't felt in far too long. My parents greeted me with open arms, their expressions a mix of concern and relief. "Sweetheart, what happened?" my mother asked, her voice soft and gentle. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for the difficult conversation ahead. "It's Alexander," I began, the words tumbling out in a rush. "He and his family, they left me behind at the airport. They told me I wasn't welcome on the trip." My parents listened in stunned silence as I recounted the events of the past few hours, the hurt and betrayal still raw in my voice. But as I spoke, I felt a weight lifting off my shoulders, as if simply acknowledging the truth had begun to set me free. After I had finished, my parents enveloped me in a tight embrace, their love and support a balm for my wounded soul. "We're here for you, sweetheart," my father said, his voice filled with warmth and reassurance. And in that moment, surrounded by the unwavering love of my family, I knew that everything was going to be okay. I may have been rejected and abandoned by Alexander and his family, but I wasn't alone. I had my parents by my side, ready to help me pick up the pieces and start anew. With a sense of gratitude and determination coursing through my veins, I knew that I was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Little did I know, this setback was just the beginning of a journey that would lead me to discover strength and resilience I never knew I had. But for now, all I could do was take comfort in the love and support of my family and trust that I was exactly where I needed to be.